Well, hello everybody, this is John Michael. Today we have a triple celebration of St. Robert Bellarmine, a 16th and 17th century saint. We celebrate St. Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century saint, and another 12th century saint, St. Albert of Jerusalem. So these three are pretty neat. St. Robert wrote on the lots of theological works. He wrote on the 7 last words of Christ. He also was part of the Counter-Reformation, speaking against Protestants, but doing it in a very charitable and a very loving way. And I like that because I became Catholic from the Protestant world. And it was the love and the kindness of people like Father Martin Walter, my spiritual father, that brought me into the Catholic Church. So kudos for that. And we celebrate St. Hildegard of Bingen. She was an abbess, and I love her because she was noted for her music, and you can hear her music recorded as best we can reproduce it today. And she was also noteworthy for science. And she had mystical revelations, and from those, she spoke to popes, bishops, priests, lay people, and pretty wonderful stuff. So I love St. Hildegard of Bingen. And we also remember St. Albert of Jerusalem. He was the patriarch of Jerusalem. There were some hermits that lived up on Mount Carmel. Later, they became the Carmelites because they didn't know what to do. So they went to the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Albert, and he wrote a rule based on what he knew, because he was a canon using the Augustinian rule. He wrote a rule based on what he knew from the Desert Fathers. And he knew that in places like the Wadi el-Natrun, they would gather into these hermit colonies where they would have hermit cells scattered around, for instance, a chapel or a common building where they would gather together, and then they would go back out into their hermit cells. So he wrote a rule for them for hermits, but it was a semi-hermetical or a semi-eremitical. The word eremitical comes from the word eremos, which means desert or wilderness. And he wrote that kind of rule for this group of hermits. And so the original Carmelites were semi-hermits, and they lived on Mount Carmel, above what is present-day Haifa. And buses still go up to that mountain. They don't see the original ruins of the monastery that the first brothers lived in. They are there, but today we go to a much more built-up and synebetical or community-oriented monastery. When they were had to leave that place and go to Italy and to Europe, they adopted a more community-oriented lifestyle. And then there were reforms of that along the way from people like St. Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross and so on, later in history. But originally, we go back to St. Albert of Jerusalem. So I love St. Albert of Jerusalem and the first Carmelite rule. And it's the only semi-eremitical rule in the Roman Catholic Church. All the other semi-eremitical expressions, like the Camaldolese and the Carthusians, are based on constitutions. But the Carmelite expression is a formal rule. Pretty cool, huh? So that's close to our heart, because here at Little Portion Hermitage and Monastery, we live the semi-eremitical way of life. So we got three saints on one day today. Pretty cool, and they're all inspirational in their own way. So St. Robert of Bellarmine, St. Hildegard of Bingen, and St. Albert of Jerusalem, pray for us so that we might be able to follow Jesus more fully and remember all things are possible with God.